Some women scream when their hearts are broken. Others cry, beg, or fight for every last penny. But Valeria, she didn't do any of that. When her billionaire husband handed her the divorce papers that would leave her with nothing but her maiden name, she didn't shed a tear. She didn't even hire a lawyer. She just signed. Her silence made him think he had won. He thought she was weak. He thought she was defeated. He had no idea that her silence wasn't surrender. It was the calm before the storm. 6 months later, the roar of a Gulfstream G700 engine would scream louder than she ever could, and it would land right on the very empire he thought was his alone. The conference room on the 45th floor of the generic downtown skyscraper smelled of expensive leather and stale intimidation. It was a scent Prescott knew well. He had manufactured it. He sat at the head of the mahogany table, his posture relaxed, bordering on insolent. He checked his Patek Philippe watch, a subtle flex of the wrist that caught the fluorescent light. "She's 5 minutes late," Prescott said, not looking up from his phone. Typical. Probably trying to make an entrance. Or maybe she's outside crying in her beat-up sedan. Tiffany, sitting to his right, giggled. She was younger, sharper, and significantly louder than the woman they were waiting for. She placed a manicured hand on Prescott's forearm. "Don't be mean, babe. It's a hard day for her. Losing you. I'd be a wreck." Across the table, Prescott's lawyer, Arthur, shuffled a stack of documents. Arthur was a shark in a 3-piece suit, a man who had made a career out of destroying prenuptial agreements and leaving spouses destitute. But today, he looked bored. This was supposed to be a slaughter. "Remember the strategy, Prescott," Arthur murmured. "If she asks for the beach house, we counter with the debt on the city apartment. If she wants alimony, we drag the proceedings out until she runs out of cash. We crush her spirit before she even opens her mouth." "She has no spirit," Prescott scoffed. "Valeria is a ghost. I've been married to her for 5 years, and I still don't think she's ever raised her voice above a whisper. She'll sign. She knows who holds the power." The heavy oak doors creaked open. Valeria walked in. She wasn't crying. She wasn't wearing a revenge dress, nor was she looking disheveled. She wore a simple charcoal blazer and black trousers. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, practical bun. She carried nothing but a small clutch. No lawyer flanked her. No stack of financial rebuttals was tucked under her arm. She looked indifferent. "Sorry I'm late," Valeria said. Her voice was steady, cool water running over smooth stones. She pulled out the chair opposite Prescott and sat down, folding her hands on the empty table. Prescott sat up straighter, frowning. He wanted tears. He wanted begging. He wanted to feel the rush of denying her. "Where is your counsel, Valeria? Arthur here isn't going to go easy on you just because you're alone." "I don't need counsel," Valeria replied, meeting his gaze. Her eyes, usually warm and accommodating, were flat. "Let's just get this over with. I have a flight to catch." Prescott exchanged a look with Tiffany. A flight? Valeria hated flying. She got airsick on commercial airlines. "A flight? Going back to your parents in Ohio?" Prescott sneered. "Economy class, I assume, since you'll be leaving this marriage with exactly what you came in with." "0. Arthur slid the thick document across the table. "Valeria, as per the prenuptial agreement, which I remind you is ironclad, you are entitled to no spousal support, no claim on Prescott's aviation assets, and no claim on the properties acquired during the marriage. You leave with your personal effects and your vehicle. That is it." Arthur paused, waiting for the objection, waiting for the fairness argument. Valeria reached into her clutch and produced a simple ballpoint pen. She didn't read the first page. She didn't flip to the asset list. She turned to the signature page. "Is this where I sign?" she asked. The room went silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. "Valeria," Prescott said, his voice dropping. He felt cheated. "Do you understand what you're doing? You're walking away from millions. If you beg, maybe I'll throw you a bone. Maybe cover your rent for a few months." Valeria looked up, pen hovering over the paper. For a split second, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone watching a child play with a loaded gun. "I don't want your money, Prescott," she said softly. "I don't want your rent. I don't want your pity." "Then what do you want?" he demanded, slamming his hand on the table. "To be unrelated to you," she said. Scritch, scratch. She signed her name, Valeria Cooper. She stood up, capped the pen, and placed it back in her clutch. "Is that all?" Arthur, the shark, looked stunned. He blinked, adjusting his glasses. Yes. Technically. Once the judge stamps this, you're divorced." "Good," Valeria said. She turned to leave. "You're making a mistake," Prescott called after her, his ego bruising purple. "You're going to be waiting tables by next week. You're going to come crawling back." Valeria paused at the door. She didn't look back. "Goodbye, Prescott. Good luck with the airfield expansion. I hear the zoning laws in that district are tricky." Then she walked out. Prescott stared at the closed door. "How did she know about the airfield expansion?" he muttered. "I haven't even announced the location yet." "Who cares?" Tiffany squealed, grabbing the signed papers. "She signed. It's over. We're free. You keep everything." Prescott forced a grin, but the cold knot in his stomach didn't loosen. Valeria's silence hadn't felt like submission. It felt like she was the one discarding him. 3 months passed. The ink on the divorce papers dried, and Prescott threw himself into his work, fueled by the manic energy of his victory. Prescott wasn't just rich, he was the CEO of Ascendancy Aviation, a private contracting firm that managed luxury hangars and private airstrips for the ultra-wealthy. His crown jewel was the Sovereign Skyport project. It was an ambitious plan to turn a massive stretch of desert land outside of Las Vegas into the world's most exclusive private airport, a playground for billionaires where they could land their jets and drive straight into high-stakes casinos without ever seeing a TSA agent. But there was a problem. A big one. "What do you mean we don't have the northern sector?" Prescott barked, pacing around his glass-walled office. He threw a stress ball against the window. His chief of operations, a nervous man named Gary, wiped sweat from his forehead. "Sir, we acquired the south, east, and west plots. But the northern sector, the strip of land we need for the main runway extension, to handle the larger jets like the Global 7500s, it was sold yesterday." "Sold?" Prescott stopped pacing. "To who? I offered those farmers double the market value." "It wasn't the farmers, sir. The farmers sold to a holding company 2 weeks ago. That holding company just flipped it to a private developer this morning." "Who is the developer?" Prescott demanded. "BlackRock, Vanguard, some Saudi prince." Gary looked down at his tablet, his face pale. "It's an LLC called Silentium Partners. We can't find a face behind it. Just a registered agent in Delaware." Prescott growled. "Silentium. Sounds pretentious. Look, I don't care who they are. Everyone has a price. That land is useless to them. It's desert scrub. It's only valuable to me because it connects to my terminal. Call them. Offer them 20% over what they paid." "We tried, sir," Gary whispered. "And?" "They said the land isn't for sale. They said they have their own plans for development." Prescott laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Plans for what? A cactus farm? They're bluffing. They want to squeeze me. This is business, Gary. They want me to sweat. Set up a meeting. I want to meet the owner of Silentium Partners face to face. I'll bring the checkbook, and I'll bring the intimidation. They already requested a meeting, sir, Gary said. See? I told you, Prescott smirked, adjusting his tie. When? Today. In 1 hour. Where? My office? No, sir. Gary swallowed hard. They want to meet on the land, Sector North. They said they're inspecting the property. Prescott grabbed his jacket. Fine. Get the Range Rover. Let's go show these amateurs how the big dogs play. The drive to the Sovereign Skyport site took 40 minutes. The heat shimmering off the Nevada desert distorted the horizon. As they approached the construction site of Prescott's terminal, the steel skeleton of his future empire rose from the dust. It was magnificent. But as the Range Rover crested the hill toward the disputed northern sector, Prescott saw something that made him slam on the brakes. "What is that?" he whispered. On the useless scrubland of the northern sector, there was activity. But not construction equipment. There was a temporary runway. It was a high-grade, military-style rapid deployment strip, the kind used by forward operating bases. It had been laid down with incredible speed and precision, and sitting right in the middle of it was a black SUV convoy. "Drive," Prescott ordered, his voice tight. They skidded to a halt near the boundary line. Prescott jumped out, dust swirling around his Italian loafers. He marched toward the convoy, Gary trailing behind him. "Hey!" Prescott shouted at a large man in a suit standing by one of the SUVs. "Who is in charge here? You're trespassing on... Well, you're adjacent to an active construction zone." The bodyguard didn't flinch. He just pointed toward the sky. A low hum began to vibrate in Prescott's chest. It wasn't the wind. It was a sound he knew better than his own heartbeat. Turbofans. Rolls-Royce Pearl 700 engines. He looked up. Descending from the blue sky, gleaming like a silver bullet, was a jet. But not just any jet. It was a Gulfstream G700, the apex predator of private aviation. It was massive, sleek, and brand new. The livery was a deep, midnight blue with silver accents. "That's a $75 million plane," Gary gasped. Who is this?" Prescott didn't answer. He watched, mesmerized and terrified, as the massive bird flared and touched down smoothly on the temporary strip. The thrust reversers roared, kicking up a storm of sand, bringing the beast to a halt just 50 yards from where Prescott stood. The engines whined down. The air stairs slowly unfolded from the fuselage. "All right," Prescott muttered, straightening his jacket. "Here comes the CEO. Probably some old tech billionaire. I'll shake his hand, compliment his toy, and buy his land." A figure appeared at the top of the stairs. It wasn't an old man. It wasn't a tech bro in a hoodie. First, he saw the shoes, red-bottomed stilettos, sharp enough to kill. Then, the legs, draped in white silk trousers. Then, a fitted white blazer that screamed bespoke Italian tailoring. The woman descended the stairs with a grace that commanded the desert itself. She reached the bottom and removed her oversized sunglasses, looking directly at Prescott. Prescott felt his knees unlock. His breath hitched in his throat. It was Valeria. But it wasn't the Valeria he knew. The mousy, silent wife who clipped coupons and wore sensible flats was gone. This woman radiated power. She looked like she owned the air she breathed. She walked toward him, the bodyguards parting like the Red Sea. She stopped 3 feet away, the heat radiating off the jet engines behind her, creating a halo. "Hello, Prescott," she said. Her voice was the same, yet entirely different. It carried weight now. "Valeria," Prescott choked out. "What? Whose plane is this? Are you dating someone? Is this your new boyfriend's plane?" It was the only explanation his brain could process. She must have found a sugar daddy immediately. Valeria laughed. It was a dry, amused sound. My boyfriend. Oh, Prescott, you always did have a limited imagination. She turned and patted the fuselage of the G700. This is the silent one. She's mine. Paid in full. Yours? Prescott spluttered. With what money? You have nothing. You signed the papers. You left with zero. I left with zero of your money, Prescott, Valeria corrected, stepping closer, her eyes icy. I didn't take a dime of yours because I didn't need it. I never did. I don't understand, Prescott stammered, looking from her to the jet. You were a librarian when I met you. You were nobody. I was a quiet woman, Valeria said. There is a difference between being nobody and being quiet. And while you were busy building your little empire on debt and leverage, I was busy managing my inheritance. Inheritance? My grandfather wasn't just a farmer, Prescott. He was Tobias Vance. Wait, Vance is banned. Let's correct. He was Tobias Hale. Prescott's face went white. Tobias Hale? The shipping magnate? The railway tycoon? He died 10 years ago. And left everything to his only granddaughter. Valeria smiled. But the trust had a clause. I couldn't access the principal until I turned 30, or until I was divorced. Grandfather never did trust the men I dated. He wanted to make sure I wasn't loved for my money. She leaned in close, smelling of expensive vanilla and jet fuel. I didn't tell you because I wanted to see if you loved me. You proved quite thoroughly that you didn't. So I signed the papers. I triggered the trust clause. And now, she swept her hand across the desert landscape. Now, I'm the owner of Silentium Partners, and I own the land you need to land your big jets. Prescott looked at the northern sector, then at his half-finished terminal. Without that land, his airport was just a very expensive parking lot for small Cessnas. He was ruined. Valeria, Prescott said, his voice trembling, switching instantly to charm mode. Baby, wait. We can talk about this. We were married. We had good times. You don't have to do this. I'm not doing anything to you, Prescott, Valeria said, putting her sunglasses back on. I'm just doing business, and my business model doesn't include partners who think silence equals stupidity. She turned back to her jet. Get off my property, Prescott. The engines are still hot, and I have a meeting in Tokyo tonight. The atmosphere in Prescott's penthouse that evening was toxic. The panoramic view of the city lights, usually a source of immense pride for him, now felt like a taunt. Every light represented a person who wasn't currently being humiliated by their ex-wife. Tiffany was pacing the living room, clutching a glass of champagne that cost more than most people's monthly car payments, but she wasn't enjoying it. So let me get this straight, she snapped, her voice shrill. She has a jet, a $75 million jet? And you have a construction site that you can't finish? Prescott massaged his temples, ignoring the throbbing vein in his forehead. It's a temporary setback, Tiff. Stop screeching. I have Arthur working on it. Arthur? Tiffany scoffed. The guy who let her walk away with a secret fortune? You said she was a nobody. You said she was a boring librarian who bought her clothes at discount stores. She was, Prescott yelled, finally snapping. He threw his tumbler of scotch into the fireplace, the crystal shattering against the marble hearth. She acted like a nobody. She drove a 10-year-old Honda. How was I supposed to know she was the granddaughter of Tobias Hale? He slumped onto the leather sofa. Tobias Hale. The man was a legend. He owned half the shipping routes in the Atlantic. If she really has access to that trust, she has more liquidity than my entire company. So take it, Tiffany demanded, sitting next to him and gripping his arm with manic intensity. "Sue her. You were married for 5 years. That money is marital property. Half of it is yours. We can take the jet. We can take the land." Prescott looked at her, seeing the greed in her eyes. It mirrored his own, which was perhaps why he suddenly felt nauseous. It's not that simple. At that moment, Arthur arrived. He looked disheveled, a rare state for the meticulously groomed lawyer. He carried a briefcase that looked heavy with bad news. "Tell me you found a loophole," Prescott said, not standing up. "Tell me we can sue her for fraud. She didn't disclose her assets during the divorce proceedings. That's perjury. That voids the settlement." Arthur sat down, loosening his tie. He pulled out a thick file. "I spent the last 6 hours with a team of forensic accountants and 3 estate law specialists. We went through the Hale Trust documents. They're public record if you know where to look in Delaware." And she didn't lie, Prescott," Arthur said, his voice defeated. "The trust is an irrevocable generation-skipping trust with a specific dissolution trigger. The assets were not legally hers while she was married to you. The title to the assets remained with the trustee." Arthur opened the file and pointed to a highlighted paragraph. "Read this. The beneficiary scooper have no claim, title or interest in the principal until such time as she reaches the age of 30 years, or until such time as her marriage to Prescott Sterling is legally dissolved, whichever comes first." Prescott stared at his own name in the legal text. "Wait, my name is in the trust? Her grandfather wrote my name in the trust?" "It appears the amendment was added shortly after your wedding," Arthur said grimly. "Her grandfather didn't just protect her money. He specifically bet against you. By signing the divorce papers, you literally unlocked the vault for her. At the moment of the judge's signature, the assets transferred. During the marriage, she had 0. The second the marriage ended, she had billions. Technically, she disclosed everything accurately. She had nothing during the divorce." Prescott felt the blood drain from his face. "So I did this? I made her rich?" "You made her powerful," Arthur corrected. "And because you insisted on the clean break clause to protect your assets, you waived any future claims on hers. You built an iron wall to keep her out of your wallet. And now that same wall is keeping you out of hers." "There has to be something," Prescott roared, standing up and pacing. "She's blocking my runway. I have investors coming next week. If I can't show them a functional path for the Global 7500s, Ascendancy Aviation is dead in the water. I'm leveraged to the hilt, Arthur. I borrowed against the future value of the terminal." Arthur sighed. "Legal routes will take years. She has the money to bury us in motions until we're both collecting Social Security. If you want that land, you can't sue for it. You have to force her to sell." "Force her how?" "Pressure," Arthur said. "Zoning. Permits. Environmental studies. The county commissioners are your friends, right? You've been donating to their campaigns for years. Make it impossible for her to build anything on that land. If her land is useless to her, maybe she'll sell it to you, just to get rid of the headache." Prescott's eyes narrowed. A cruel smile slowly returned to his face. "Yes. Commissioner Grant owes me a favor. I bought his son a car last year. And the EPA inspector. I know about his gambling debts." He turned to Tiffany. "Pour me another drink, babe. Valeria might have the money, but she doesn't know how the real world works. She thinks she can just land a jet and win. I'm going to bury her in red tape, so thick she won't be able to breathe." 2 weeks later, the annual Wings of Nevada Gala was held at the Bellagio. It was the premier event for the aviation industry in the Southwest. Every CEO, lobbyist, and high-net-worth individual with a pilot's license was there. Prescott walked into the ballroom with Tiffany on his arm. He looked impeccable in a Tom Ford tuxedo, but inside he was sweating. The last 2 weeks had been a nightmare. He had called in every favor. He had the county inspect Valeria's temporary runway 3 times. He had the EPA file a noise complaint. He had tried to block the access road to the northern sector, claiming it was a private easement. And yet, Valeria hadn't responded. No angry phone calls, no cease and desist letters. Just silence. Smile, Tiffany hissed through her teeth. She was wearing a dress that was slightly too tight and slightly too sparkly, trying too hard to look like old money. Everyone is looking at us. They're looking to see if I'm dead yet, Prescott muttered. He scanned the room. He needed to find Lucas Thorne. Lucas was the CEO of Horizon Logistics, a major freight company looking for a new hub. If Prescott could sign Lucas tonight, the deposit would cover his loan interest for 6 months. He spotted Lucas near the ice sculpture, talking to... Prescott froze. Lucas Drake was talking to Valeria. But she wasn't alone. She was surrounded. A circle of men in expensive suits, men Prescott recognized as some of the most powerful players in the state, hung on her every word. And Valeria, she was breathtaking. She wore a gown of liquid midnight blue silk that draped over her body like water. It was elegant, understated, and clearly cost more than Prescott's car. Her hair was down, cascading in loose waves. Around her neck sat a sapphire necklace that caught the chandelier light, a piece that looked suspiciously like the famous Star of Bombay from the Hale collection. She didn't look like an ex-wife. She looked like a queen holding court. Prescott marched over, dragging Tiffany with him. He couldn't let her steal his potential client. "Lucas!" Prescott boomed, forcing a jovial tone. "I see you've met my ex-wife." The circle opened. Valeria turned slowly, her expression unreadable. She held a glass of sparkling water. "Prescott," Lucas said, nodding. "We were just discussing the future of Nevada aviation. Valeria has some fascinating ideas." "Valeria?" Prescott laughed condescendingly. "Valeria thinks a private jet makes her an expert, but running an airport is about infrastructure, logistics, politics. It's not a hobby for socialites." He looked at Valeria, expecting her to shrink away as she used to when he belittled her in public. Instead, she took a sip of water and smiled. "You're right, Prescott. It's not a hobby. That's why I'm not building an airport. See?" Prescott turned to Lucas. "She admits it. She's just squatting on the land to spite me. She has no development plan." "I'm not building an airport," Valeria continued, her voice clear and carrying over the low hum of the party. "I'm building an aviation sanctuary." "A what?" Tiffany asked, wrinkling her nose. Valeria turned to the group, addressing the investors. "Standard private airports, like the one Prescott is struggling to finish, are merely parking lots. You land, you get in a car, you leave. It's transactional. It's cold." She gestured with her glass. "My project, the Halo, is a destination. The northern sector isn't just a runway. I've already broken ground on a 50-suite ultra-luxury boutique hotel, a subterranean spa, and a high-security vault facility for clients to store high-value assets like art and gold. Pilots don't just drop off passengers. They have a dedicated lounge that rivals a Ritz-Carlton. And the passengers? They don't have to drive to the Strip to gamble. I've secured a restricted gaming license for the terminal itself." The circle of men murmured in appreciation. Prescott felt cold. "A gaming license? That's impossible. The Gaming Commission hasn't issued a new remote license in a decade." "They have when the applicant has the backing of the Hale Foundation," Valeria said softly. And when the applicant promises to build a solar farm that powers not just the airport, but the local elementary schools. You see, Prescott, while you were bribing the zoning commissioner with a used car, I was funding the city's renewable energy initiative. She turned back to Lucas Drake. Lucas, regarding your logistics fleet, the Halo will have a dedicated underground cargo transfer system. Your trucks won't ever see the light of day. Completely secure, completely discreet. And I can offer you a landing fee rate fixed for 10 years at 20% below market value. Lucas's eyes widened. 20%? How is that sustainable? I don't have debt, Valeria said simply, her eyes locking onto Prescott's. I own the land. I own the construction company. I own the capital. I don't need to gouge my partners to pay off bank loans. It was a kill shot. Everyone in the circle knew Prescott was leveraged. Lucas turned to Prescott. Prescott, look, I've liked our talks, but a fixed 10-year rate, and the security features Valeria is offering, I have to think about my shareholders. She's lying, Prescott sputtered, panic taking over. She can't build that. The EPA is investigating her for noise pollution. I filed the complaint myself. The room went quiet. Admitting he filed the complaint was a tactical error. It made him look petty. Valeria stepped closer to him. She was shorter than him, but she loomed large. The EPA complaint was dismissed this morning, Prescott, she whispered, loud enough for the group to hear. It seems the inspector you were relying on was relieved of his duties. Something about gambling debts and bribery? The authorities are looking into who was paying him. Prescott froze. Oh, Valeria added. And one more thing. You know that steel shipment you're waiting for? The one for your main terminal roof? The one that's been delayed for 3 weeks? How do you know about my steel? Prescott hissed. It was coming in on a Hale transatlantic freighter, Valeria said with a polite smile. We had to prioritize some other shipments, medical supplies, charity work. You know how it is. Logistics are tricky. It might be another 4 months. 4 months? Prescott shrieked. I'll be bankrupt in 2. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before you tried to bully the woman who controls the supply chain, Valeria said coolly. She turned her back on him. Gentlemen, Scooper, we discussed the membership tiers for the Halo. I'm offering founding memberships tonight only. The group of powerful men, including Lucas Drake, turned their backs on Prescott and followed Valeria toward the bar. Prescott was left standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, his tuxedo suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. Tiffany let go of his arm. 4 months? Tiffany asked, her voice devoid of affection. Prescott, does that mean the credit cards are going to stop working? Prescott didn't answer. He was watching his ex-wife, the quiet mouse, destroy his life without raising her voice above a conversational volume. He realized then that the silence during the divorce wasn't weakness. It was the sound of a predator stalking its prey. But he wasn't done. He had one card left to play, a card so dirty, so dangerous, that he had promised himself he would never use it. But looking at Valeria's shining back, he knew he had no choice. If he couldn't beat her in the boardroom, he would have to break her heart. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a burner phone. He scrolled to a contact labeled simply, The Wolf. The location was a dive bar in North Las Vegas, miles away from the gleaming lights of the Strip, and light years away from the circles Prescott usually moved in. He sat in a sticky booth, nursing a cheap beer, checking his phone every 30 seconds. His life was unraveling at a speed that defied physics. In the 2 weeks since the gala, Ascendancy Aviation had gone into freefall. The investors, spooked by Valeria's comments about the steel shipment and the EPA investigation, had frozen their funds. The construction site was silent. The workers had walked off the job yesterday after their paychecks bounced. And Tiffany was gone. She hadn't even written a note. She simply packed her bags while he was at a crisis meeting and blocked his number. The only thing she left behind was his credit card statement, highlighting the limit he had reached. "You look like a man who's lost his dog," a voice rasped. Prescott looked up. Sliding into the booth opposite him was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite and bad decisions. He wore a faded leather jacket and had a scar running through his left eyebrow. This was Kyle. In the darker corners of the corporate world, Kyle was known as a fixer, but that was a polite term. He was a demolition expert for reputations. "I haven't lost a dog," Prescott muttered. "I'm dealing with a pest, a very rich pest." Kyle signaled the waitress for a whiskey. "The ex-wife. I read the business journals. She's building the Taj Mahal of airports right next to your scrap heap." "It's not a scrap heap," Prescott snapped, then lowered his voice as a trucker at the next table glared at him. "It's a temporary delay." "But she's suffocating me. She has the suppliers, she has the zoning, she has the clients. I need her stopped, Kyle. I don't mean a delay. I mean stopped." Kyle took a sip of the whiskey that arrived. "You want her hurt? That costs extra. And I don't like hurting women unless they're shooting at me." No violence," Prescott said quickly. "He wasn't a murderer. He was just a desperate narcissist. I want her discredited. She's launching the Halo in 3 days. The governor is going to be there. The press. The FAA regional director." "High stakes," Kyle nodded. "I want you to plant something in her cargo facility." Prescott leaned in, his eyes feverish. "Something that scares the feds. Drugs. Unregistered weapons. Stolen art. I don't care. I want a raid on opening night. I want her in handcuffs while the cameras are rolling. If she loses her security clearance, she loses her gaming license. If she loses the license, the project dies. And I buy the land for pennies." Kyle studied Prescott's face for a long, uncomfortable minute. "You're asking me to infiltrate a facility that has military-grade security. I've heard about her setup. She has biometric scanners, motion sensors, and a security chief who used to run ops for the Mossad." "I have the schematics," Prescott said, sliding a USB drive across the table. "I built the original survey plans for that sector. I know where the blind spots in the perimeter fence are. There's a drainage culvert on the north ridge. It leads directly into the subterranean maintenance tunnels." Kyle fingered the USB drive. "And the payload?" "I still have a few contacts in the import business who owe me favors," Prescott whispered. "There's a crate sitting in a warehouse in Henderson, marked as avionic parts. Inside, it's counterfeit currency plates, high-grade stuff, highly illegal. If the Secret Service finds that in her vault..." "She goes away for 20 years, Kyle finished. He smirked. "You really hate her, don't you?" "I hate that she thinks she's better than me," Prescott spat. "She was nothing. I made her. And now she's trying to erase me." "It'll cost you," Kyle said. 50,000 now. 50 when the cuffs go on." Prescott swallowed hard. 50,000 was literally all the cash he had left. It was the payroll money he had managed to scrape together from selling his vintage Porsche that morning. "Done," Prescott said, pushing an envelope of cash across the table. Kyle took the envelope and the drive. He stood up. "Watch the news on Friday night, Prescott. It's going to be a hell of a show." As Kyle walked out, Prescott slumped back against the vinyl seat. He felt dirty. He felt terrified. But for the first time in months, he smiled. Valeria thought she was untouchable because she played by the rules of the elite. She had forgotten that Prescott played by the rules of the gutter. Friday night arrived with the fanfare of a coronation. The desert sky was lit up by searchlights, sweeping back and forth over the halo. It was even more magnificent than the renderings. The main terminal wasn't just a building, it was a sculpture of glass and white steel, shaped like a bird in mid-flight. The runway was lined with blue LED lights that made the tarmac look like a river of sapphire. Prescott watched from the balcony of his darkened, empty office tower a mile away. He held a pair of high-powered binoculars. He could see the limousines arriving. He saw the governor shaking hands with Valeria. Valeria looked ethereal. She wore a silver gown that shimmered like moonlight. She was laughing, looking relaxed, looking triumphant. "Laugh while you can," Prescott whispered, checking his watch. It was 9:00 p.m. According to Cale, the tip had already been called in. The anonymous call to the FBI field office in Las Vegas, claiming that a massive counterfeiting operation was being run out of the secure vaults of Silentium Partners. Prescott waited. 9:15 p.m. 9:30 p.m. Where were they? Where were the sirens? Where were the black SUVs tearing down the access road? The party seemed to be getting louder. He could hear the faint sound of a jazz band carrying over the desert air. Then his phone rang. He snatched it up, expecting Cale to tell him it was done. "Mr. Prescott Sterling?" a stern voice asked. "Speaking," Prescott said, confused. "This is Special Agent Miller with the FBI. We need you to come down to the Silentium Partners airfield immediately." Prescott's heart leaped into his throat. It worked. They were calling him as a witness, or maybe they needed him to identify the property lines. "Is there a problem, Agent?" Prescott asked, trying to sound casual. "We have executed a search warrant based on an anonymous tip regarding counterfeit goods," Agent Miller said. "We need you to clarify some ownership documents regarding the container in question. It has your company's shipping manifest on it." Prescott froze. "My shipping manifest? Kyle was supposed to scrub the labels. That idiot!" I'll be right there," Prescott said. He had to spin this. He had to tell them he sold that container years ago. He had to distance himself. He drove to the halo like a maniac. When he arrived at the gate, the security guard, a massive man in a tactical suit, didn't stop him. He just waved him through with a grim smile. Prescott drove up to the main hangar. The party had stopped. The guests were gathered in a confused circle near the champagne fountain. In the center of the hangar, surrounded by FBI agents, was the crate. The lid was pried open. Prescott walked up, his legs feeling like jelly. He saw Valeria standing next to Agent Miller. She wasn't in handcuffs. She looked calm. "Ah, Mr. Sterling," Agent Miller said, stepping forward. "Thank you for joining us." "I don't know what this is," Prescott blurted out immediately. "If my name is on that crate, it's a mistake. I haven't shipped anything in months." "That's interesting," Valeria said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Because according to the metadata on the shipping request, this crate was logged into the system yesterday, using your personal override code." "That's impossible," Prescott shouted. "I've been hacked." "We opened the crate, Mr. Sterling," Agent Miller said. Prescott held his breath. "Here it comes, the plates." "And we found this." Miller gestured to the open box. Prescott looked inside. It wasn't currency plates, it wasn't drugs, it was filled with shredded paper. And on top of the pile of trash sat a single, small digital tablet playing a video on a loop. Prescott squinted at the screen. The blood drained from his face so fast he nearly fainted. The video was of him. In the dive bar, sitting with Cale, the audio was crystal clear. "I want you to plant something. Counterfeit currency plates. 50,000 now, 50 when the cuffs go on." Prescott staggered back. "No, that's a deep fake. AI, that's not me." Valeria stepped forward, her silver dress swishing softly. She looked at him with a mixture of pity and steel. "Prescott," she said softly, "do you really think I built a billion-dollar facility without knowing who the local mercenaries are?" She gestured to the side. Kyle stepped out from behind a stack of crates. He wasn't wearing his leather jacket. He was wearing a tuxedo. "You," Prescott gasped. "You rat! You set me up!" "I'm a businessman, Prescott," Kyle shrugged. "You offered me 50 grand. Valeria offered me a job as head of corporate security. 6 figures, full benefits, and dental. The choice wasn't hard." "Kyle came to me the moment you left the bar," Valeria explained. "We decided to let you play your hand. We wanted it on record. We wanted the FBI to see exactly how far you would go." Agent Miller produced a pair of handcuffs. "Prescott Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal fraud, filing a false report, and attempted evidence tampering." The guests gasped. Cameras flashed, not at Valeria, but at Prescott. "Valeria!" Prescott screamed as the agents grabbed his arms. "Valeria, please, don't let them do this. I was desperate. I'm ruined. You can't send me to jail." Valeria didn't look away. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. "You did this to yourself, Prescott," she said. "You were so obsessed with destroying me that you forgot to build anything for yourself. You're not the victim here. You're just the noise." She turned to Agent Miller. "Get him off my runway, Agent. I have planes landing." As they dragged Prescott toward the squad car, kicking and screaming, he watched Valeria turn back to her guests. The band started playing again. The champagne flowed. He was the ex-husband. He was the failure. And she was the queen of the sky. 6 months had passed since the FBI raid, but the Nevada desert remained as unforgiving as ever. The sun beat down on the tarmac with a relentless intensity, shimmering in waves of heat that distorted the horizon. However, inside the cabin of the Silent One, the climate was a perfectly curated oasis of 68 degrees. Valeria Cooper sat in the plush leather captain's chair, the soft hum of the Gulfstream's auxiliary power unit vibrating gently beneath her feet. She wasn't looking at the view. Her attention was focused on the quarterly reports spread across the mahogany table in front of her. The numbers told a story far more compelling than any she had lived in the past 5 years. The halo wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. The 50-suite hotel was booked to capacity for the next 24 months. The sanctuary concept, a place where privacy was the ultimate luxury, had revolutionized the private aviation industry. She had created a haven, and the world's elite were flocking to it. A soft knock on the cabin door broke her concentration. "Miss Cooper," Valeria looked up. Sarah, her new executive assistant, a sharp, efficient young woman with none of Tiffany's airs, stood in the doorway holding a slim tablet. "We received the clearance for the London departure," Sarah said. "The pilots are running the final pre-flight checks, but there's one last item of business that just came across my desk." Valeria capped her pen, leaning back. "What is it?" "The bankruptcy auction for Ascendancy Aviation concluded this morning," Sarah said, her voice neutral. "The assets were liquidated." The name hung in the air for a moment. Ascendancy. The word that was supposed to define Prescott's rise had ultimately become the title of his fall. Valeria turned her gaze toward the window. Through the thick, tinted glass, she could see the fence line that separated her property from his. "And?" Valeria asked quietly. "The banks managed to sell off the heavy equipment and the office furniture," Sarah explained, checking her tablet. "Pennies on the dollar, mostly. But the land, the southern and eastern sectors, nobody wanted them." Valeria raised an eyebrow. "Nobody?" "The environmental assessment came back last week. The soil contamination from his rushed construction practices Fuel leaks, improper waste disposal, made the land a massive liability. The developers walked away. The bank is stuck with it. So they're sitting there, rotting. Yes, Mum, it's a dead zone, unless... Sarah hesitated, looking at her employer. Unless I buy them, Valeria finished, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. Sarah nodded. The bank is desperate to get the liability off their books. They're asking for a token amount, $50,000. Valeria let out a laugh. It wasn't a laugh of mockery, but of genuine, incredulous amusement. It was rich, deep, and untainted by bitterness. $50,000. The cosmic irony was almost too perfect. It was the exact amount Prescott had paid Kyle to plant the evidence that would have destroyed her life. The price of his betrayal was now the price of his legacy. "Buy it," Valeria said decisively. "What should we do with it?" Sarah asked. "The soil remediation alone will cost millions." "I don't care about the cost," Valeria said, her voice firm. "Bulldoze his half-finished terminal. Tear down those steel beams he was so proud of. I want you to turn that land into a solar farm. It will power our new hangar extension. Let his failure provide the energy for our success." "Understood," Sarah typed a note quickly. "And Sarah," Valeria added, her tone softening. "Yes, Ms. Cooper? Plant a garden there, right in the center, where his office used to be. I want wild roses, the hardy kind, the ones that have thorns but bloom beautifully in the desert heat." Sarah smiled. "Consider it done." Sarah stepped out of the cabin, closing the door softly. Moments later, the low whine of the Rolls-Royce Pearl engines began to climb in pitch, a powerful crescendo that signaled readiness. Valeria turned back to the window as the jet began to taxi. She watched the landscape roll by. On one side, she saw the pristine, manicured grounds of the Halo, bustling with activity and life. On the other, separated by a chain-link fence, stood the rusting, silent skeleton of Prescott's unfinished terminal. It looked small now, insignificant. Her mind drifted briefly to him. Prescott was currently 6 months into a 3-year sentence at a minimum security facility in Arizona. He wrote to her, of course. At first, the letters were filled with rage, blaming her for tricking him. Then came the bargaining, the promises that he had changed. The last one had been a beg for money for his commissary account. She hadn't opened a single one. She burned them all in the fireplace of her new home, watching the paper curl into ash. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger required energy, a precious resource she refused to waste on a ghost. He was the past, a lesson learned in the hardest way possible. The jet turned onto the main runway, her runway. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their departure. The thrust pushed her back into the soft leather seat, a feeling of immense, controlled power. As they accelerated, Valeria closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She remembered the day in the lawyer's office, the smell of stale coffee and intimidation, the way Prescott had sneered at her silence, mistaking it for submission. He had thought she was weak because she didn't scream. He hadn't understood that silence wasn't empty. Silence was full of answers. Silence was where you strategized. Silence was where you built your strength while the world was busy making noise. The jet lifted off, the wheels leaving the tarmac with a gentle thud. They banked sharply to the right, climbing higher and higher into the endless, brilliant blue of the Nevada sky. Below her, the desert shrank. The scars of the construction, the rusting beams, the boundaries of the property, they all faded until they were invisible. She was no longer Mrs. Sterling. She wasn't the victim. She wasn't even the survivor. She was Valeria Cooper, and she was finally truly flying. Valeria didn't just win the divorce, she won her life back. She proved that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest, and that true power doesn't need to scream, it just needs to execute. Prescott learned the hard way that when you underestimate a quiet woman, you might just be standing on the runway she's about to own. If you enjoyed this story of karma, luxury, and the ultimate comeback, hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were Valeria? Would you have visited Prescott in jail, or would you have burned the letters just like she did? Thanks for watching.